Hi, I'm Anne Gaviola. Welcome to the Peak on Global, where we break down what is trending in the business world and what you need to know to stay ahead of the curve. Joining me now is Brett Chang from the Peak podcast. Welcome, Brett.
Hey, Anne, great to be back with you.
Let's dive in. Let's talk about an economic soft landing for Canada. You and I have chatted about the tricky task the central bank has of cooling the economy with interest rates to dampen demand and try to tame high inflation. With inflation calming down, I'm increasingly hearing from economists that elusive soft landing is in fact back on the table. It may even be possible if we head into a recession. I didn't know before that it was, not an either or type of situation.
Yeah, it's definitely looking better for the soft landing crowd. So you're absolutely right. Inflation has cooled now to 6.3%. I think the biggest challenge the central bank has is that they have to decide what they do about interest rates. Now, 6.3% is really far from their target 2% inflation. So it's a big question of how aggressively they now push rate hikes or if they hike rates at all. And that's something we'll have to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. And a little reminder to everyone that the Bank of Canada actually has a range. So 1 to 3% inflation is what they're aiming for. Let's switch topics, though. It is the third week of January. One of the big stories here, we're seeing the tech layoffs being announced, and they have been brutal. So Google's parent company axing 12,000, 10,000 positions eliminated at Microsoft, 18,000 at Amazon, which is the most in one go in the company's history. My heart goes out to all of those affected, all the people, the households, the families. Brett, your thoughts on what's happening here?
It's a really tough time if you work in tech right now. And we just wrote a story a few days ago about how a lot of employees at big tech companies are already looking for another opportunity outside of their current workplace simply because they're not sure if they might have a job in the next few months. And so they're already coming up with a backup plan. Now, the important point to note, and I think we're going to talk about this in a second, but it's that this is really focused on the tech industry right now, and tech workers are bearing the brunt of the layoffs. The good news is that these are highly educated, very qualified workers who I think have lots of options ahead of them. So I hope that for their sake that they can find a new opportunity shortly after being laid off.
Absolutely, and you and I have discussed this in some ways. What's happening is a right sizing in tech. It got really frothy. A lot of companies grew quite a lot and did a lot of hiring during the earlier part of the pandemic, and now things are different. The environment is very different. So we'll be watching closely to see if the mass layoffs spread to industries beyond tech in a major way. But I do want to take a moment to talk about the way that workers are let go. And I understand there are business decisions. These are often made by bean counters who are very concerned about the bottom line and strategy. But I read some of the wording in, for example, the Amazon memo, and I really felt it could have been more empathetic. I think burning bridges is never wise with these very skilled workers. A more softly worded parting note is always a good idea, in my opinion. And I'm pretty sure I could get ChatGPT to craft something better than what we saw put out there.
It's really tough to get this right. I think it's something that a lot of CEOs and senior executives really struggle with is when you do such a big layoff, how do you best communicate that to employees? A couple of rules of thumbs that I've read before is that you really want to have that human connection. I think it is better if people hear directly from their manager, preferably in person rather than one mass email being sent out or one huge town hall. Now that gets really tough when you're laying off 11,000 employees, but I think that really would help soften the blow. The second thing about it, too, is that you really need to be your employees' best cheerleader, that you're going to let go a lot of really, really good people that are only being let go because you've deprioritized that project. Doesn't mean they're bad at their job. And so doing whatever you can to help them find that next opportunity, vouching for them, speaking on their behalf, connecting them with people that would be interested in hiring that quality of talent, especially if you've been at somewhere like a Google or a Microsoft, that's really important as well. And so I think you're absolutely right. The empathy is critical when doing something like this. And I think a lot of executives could bring much more humanity to the whole situation to really ease the blow, because it is a really tough time for these folks.
One final note as well, it matters how you do it and when you do it. I once worked at a place that would announce that layoffs were coming on Friday, and then we'd find out the nitty-gritty on Monday. So you had the entire weekend to worry about it. And even if you didn't get the axe yourself, it was really anxiety causing for everyone involved. Let's switch to our third topic here. Now, the final tally is in, and according to the Insurance Bureau of Canada, severe weather caused $3.1 billion in insured damage in this country in 2022. So this includes flooding, storms, and Hurricane Fiona. It was in the top 3 most expensive years for insured losses. Political beliefs aside, let's shelve that. There is no denying the increased frequency and severity of severe weather. We have the data, we have the dollar amounts. There are a lot of factors feeding into all of this, but I'd like your thoughts, Brett.
Well, the interesting part of what you just mentioned is that the insurance companies, they're on the front line of climate change. They're actually seeing the effects of it day in and day out with the claims that they're issuing. So they're getting a really good sense of what the future will look like when it comes to particularly the Canadian climate and what the consequences of that might be. But everywhere you look, you can kind of start to see it happen. We're just seeing more floods. We live in Toronto. You're seeing more floods in Toronto. You're seeing less snow. You're seeing warmer than usual temperatures in different parts of the country. Vancouver has gotten a lot of snow over the past few months. So the consequences really are starting to bear their fruit, and insurance companies are really on the front line of that. And so they have to now adjust their measurements based on what they've issued these policies for in the past to what actually might happen. And that's going to be a really big effort. So they're particularly dialed into this topic and I think are very well informed on it. So it's definitely worth listening to.
Absolutely. And I want to riff on that thread of data being politicized instead of believed, or in some cases bent in the name of corporate profits. I'm going to bring in another big story that was out this week. New federal guidelines recommend Canadians limit themselves to 2 drinks or less per week to minimize health risks related to alcohol consumption. Now, this is the result of 2 years worth of research. I invite people to go check it out if you haven't already. Now, full disclosure, I love a glass or 3 of wine with dinner on occasion, but this is pretty sobering news, Brett. It reminds me, not exact parallels, but it does remind me of when Big Tobacco pushed this idea of cigarettes being safe and an integral part of having a good time and socializing.
Well, there's always going to be debate around this type of report, especially the science around it. I saw some competing experts saying that these cancers are very rare and that by reducing your alcohol consumption, you will only minorly reduce the possibility that you might get them. And so there's a lot of still debate around this report. And it is, to be fair, outside of the norms internationally. Most other health authorities in the UK and in Australia and the FDA in the US, they say something very different. But look, I think it is undeniable that alcohol can be a contributing factor to a number of very bad diseases, including cancer. And it's important for, I think, all Canadians to take a look at their alcohol consumption and think, are they within where they feel comfortable? And looking at the science and looking at the research that's been done, is this what they feel comfortable consuming on a daily or weekly basis? I think having that conversation is healthy, and I'm happy that this is sparking that because, really, they're like we just talked about, there's a kind of undeniable science that this is true. And so it's then up to the individual to decide, are they aligned with that, or what's their moderation going to look like? Because everyone's going to be different.
Absolutely, and I think this is an alignment and a clarification of this behavior is tantamount to this level of risk and what are you comfortable with taking, but we should be really clear on what corresponds with what. Thank you so much for your time and your insight as always, Brett.
Thanks, Anne.
And you can get all your daily business news with the Peak Daily Podcast. It is available for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts.